Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to impartially unpack the highly charged debate surrounding Scottish independence. It's a topic that usually runs incredibly hot with emotion, but today, we're taking a step back and grounding ourselves entirely in the data. From the hard economic and fiscal realities to shifting geopolitics, we're going to look at exactly what's at stake.
Here's our roadmap for the discussion. We'll be covering Section 1, the 2028 referendum push; Section 2, the Trade Balancing Act; Section 3, the Public Finance Ledger; Section 4, Global Security and Influence; and finally, Section 5, the Everyday Voter Dilemma.
Okay, Section 1, the 2028 referendum push, the political spark.
So, let's start right at the top with First Minister John Swinney. He recently announced that it's, quote, perfectly conceivable to hold a second independence referendum as early as 2028, assuming the SNP secures a majority. His core pitch to voters? He wants to deliver an emphatic mandate so the future of the country can be taken into their own hands. It's a really powerful, direct appeal for total national sovereignty.
But here's where we hit a bit of a roadblock. There's a pretty stark contrast right now between that overarching political ambition and the actual realities on the ground. Current polling suggests a 2028 referendum is actually a bit of a long shot. The data clearly shows that a majority of Scots currently oppose independence. So we've got this fascinating tension between political drive and the present public appetite.
Moving on to Section 2, the Trade Balancing Act, deep economic integration.
To really understand the mechanics of independence, we have to look at the deep economic integration that's already at play. According to the Economics Observatory, the rest of the UK is, by an absolute landslide, Scotland's biggest trading partner. Just look at 2023. A massive 60% of Scottish exports, worth over £55 billion, went directly to the UK. Now compare that to their exports to the EU, which sat at just over £17 billion. That is a deeply, deeply intertwined economic reality.
Now, the crucial question here is how an independent Scotland would navigate international trade, especially if it decided to rejoin the European Union. Because rejoining the EU would mean, as The Spectator put it, tearing Scotland out of the customs union and single market of the United Kingdom. So separating from the UK to align with Europe fundamentally complicates that dominant trade relationship we just looked at. You're essentially talking about introducing a hard trade border right across the island of Great Britain.
And why does that actually matter to the average citizen's wallet? Well, analysis from the Economics Observatory makes it pretty clear. The financial gains of returning to the EU simply wouldn't make up for the economic losses caused by increased border costs with their biggest trading partner. Basically, the friction of a hard border with the UK would carry a heavier financial toll than the benefits they'd gain from the EU single market.
All right, Section 3, the Public Finance Ledger, deficits and redistribution.
Transitioning from trade over to public services, we hit another core issue, which is the fiscal deficit. Right now, this is absorbed by the wider UK budget, but independence would instantly expose Scotland's own net fiscal deficit. In the 2024 to 2025 cycle, Scotland's deficit sat at £26.2 billion. That's 11.6% of its GDP. When you compare that to the UK-wide deficit of 5.1%, you can see that's a massive fiscal gap a newly independent government would have to manage from literally day one.
So what does this actually mean for everyday public services? Well, right now, through something called the Barnett Formula, wealth is redistributed throughout the Union. And because of this, people in Scotland benefit from an additional £2,576 in public spending per head compared to the UK average. Independence would mean untangling from this formula, which immediately raises some pretty tough questions about how to fund essential daily services without that extra backing.
Which brings us to Section 4. Global Security and Influence, the macro stage.
Drawing a new national border doesn't just change things at home. It fundamentally resets international alliances. In the short term, an independent Scotland would instantly lose the transnational access it currently enjoys through the UK Union. We're talking about representation in the UN Global Trade Division, the G7, and crucially, NATO. Scotland would have to independently reapply to all of these organizations. And during that transition period, it would effectively be stripped of its voice on massive global issues like climate change and international peacekeeping.
This actually takes on a whole new level of importance as the global security environment gets more volatile. As Europe rearms against the Russian threat, amid concerns of US withdrawal, we're seeing a really fascinating clash of ideologies. You see, the Scottish independence movement has a long-standing anti-nuclear stance, opposing both nuclear weapons and nuclear power. But this directly contradicts a recent poll highlighted by the Scottish Daily Express, which shows that most Scots actually want to retain the nuclear deterrent, and they feel more secure and have more influence as part of the UK.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, the everyday voter dilemma, grounding the geopolitics.
What do these massive global shifts actually mean for everyday life? This brings us to exactly why a clear majority repeatedly support pro-UK parties. A lot of voters are deeply anxious about the practical, day-to-day complications of independence. We're talking about adopting a completely different currency, issuing new passports, and changing administrative licenses. And honestly, on a more emotional level, it's about the friction of placing a hard border between long-established family ties and local retailers. For many people, staying in the United Kingdom is simply about avoiding these hurdles entirely.
So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. When you weigh the data, the £55 billion in UK trade, the £2,500 per head in Barnett formula benefits, and the immediate security of NATO membership, against that profound historical ambition for a nation to take its future fully into its own hands, which path truly benefits the Scottish people most? It is an incredibly complex question, but you now have the facts driving the debate. Keep questioning the data, and thanks so much for joining me.